Reports from the state of Alabama reveal that inmate labor strikes are underway at 5 Alabama prisons, pushing 2 facilities into a state of lockdown. Now, these strikes are being staged by a group of prisoners calling themselves the Free Alabama Movement. Their aim? To raise awareness of the inhumane conditions, worker exploitation, and an atmosphere that the group feels promotes recidivism. Now, there's one anecdotal piece with this, and that's their strategy behind it. Their intention was for this to fall in sync with May Day, which is an international day of celebration for socialists and other advocates of workers' rights, aka Labor Day, which we celebrate here in California and everywhere else, but in September. So some of the facts: Alabama prisons are said to be some of the most violent in the country, and the inmates have made no specific demands on their desired outcomes. They've been striking for upwards of 7 days at this time. They're saying this could go to upwards of 30 days. And, the Alabama Department of Corrections is investigating this. Guards at some of the facilities are having to carry out work that's usually done by inmates. This includes recycling and laundry and food preparation. And as a retaliatory measure, they are bird feeding some of the inmates, and lessening their food that they're delivering to them in hopes that maybe they'll crack a little bit.
So bird feeding, you mean they're getting less food?
Yes.
So they're reducing their food ration.
They're reducing the food ration.
So it still tastes awful, but they're just getting less of it.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Less of the awful food, yeah.
Right.
And the Free Alabama Movement, this is founded by a man identified as Melvin. He's serving a life sentence for murder. There's a Facebook group. They even have YouTube postings of videos of some of the inhumane living conditions, the eating conditions, rodent infestation. Here's what one of the prisoners, or there's a statement from the prisoners. Here's what they have to say. Let us be clear. This is not just about the deplorable conditions of confinement, but more so about the 13th Amendment, the Alabama Constitution of 1901, and the statutory laws discriminatorily enacted from both. The laws that create and maintain the denial of our human rights and perpetuation of our economical exploitation.
Where does that leave you feeling? I mean, it's difficult in some ways to reconcile the 13th Amendment, which dealt with the abolition of slavery, with the current situation in the prison system, where these people have committed an offence, or the assumption is they're guilty of the offence at which they were charged. They're serving time for that, and they're invoking the 13th Amendment. What are your thoughts when you hear that?
I'm of mixed emotion, because part of me feels like, one, it's not supposed to be cushy and nice in there, because if it was, everybody would want to go, right? It's not the Four Seasons. It's not meant to be the Ritz-Carlton, some luxury resort. But at the same time, I do have an issue with the inhumaneness associated with some of the things that do happen in the prison system, because I feel like there needs to be an element of humanity that's present there. I know some people may think otherwise, because of some of the crimes that these people have committed, but it's the inhumane quality that I struggle with.
Sure. I mean, it comes down to how you view the prison service, and what you view the point of prison being, whether you view it as something which is ultimately to punish, or whether it's ultimately to punish and rehabilitate, or to serve as a deterrent. And there's a fine line to be had between all of that. But if we want to reduce prison occupancy, if we want to reduce recidivism, if we want to enhance the lot of people who are in there and not simply throw them in the wastebasket of life, then yes, arguably, you need to improve conditions. And certainly they should not be held in inhumane conditions. What that has to do with the 13th Amendment and slavery per se, because that was a very specific thing, a very specific amendment that was brought in for a specific historical fact, as a horrible stain on this country. But it was something very specific. I don't know quite how that. I think they brought that in to highlight the inhumanity and to highlight their plight, and they've done so effectively. I mean, what's clear is that they have a very capable social media presence, and they're posting online. And where I do have increased sympathy with that argument about invoking the 13th Amendment is the fact that they are for-profit businesses, these prisons, and particularly somewhere like Alabama has a chronic overcrowding population and an overcrowding problem in prisons. The guaranteed occupancy legislation that came in guarantees or encourages 90% and above occupancy rates. So it is, and these prisons are for-profit entities. These prisons contribute to the re-election of state officials. And so there is very much a hand-in-glove, a complicity between state officials and the prisons, and the fact that they are for-profit entities, to maintain those occupancy levels through the roof. And that then leads to a lot of the problems that we're seeing here in terms of inhumane conditions, overcrowding, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact of the matter is that these prisons are for-profit entities, very often on the backs of these guys who are working. Admittedly, they're criminals, and but they're paying their dues, and they're doing what is expected of them. So I have increased sympathy in terms of their approach. That you're making a profit on the back of us, and we're working. And to the point being is that it's now gone into chaos, because with them not doing the jobs that they're assigned to do, that someone else is having to pick up the slack. So they do what they do does contribute to the functioning, the functionality of the prison.
And there was another report that just I think it was in April, that Texas, there were a number of prisons in Texas where inmates also went on these labor strikes. So yeah, I think that it's very interesting. I mean, I agree with you with your point about the 13th Amendment and just using that as leverage. I don't know that I'm fully on board with that piece, especially after the statement that the prisoners released. But I think it's up. I just think that it's up for discussion, and it really is troublesome. That like I said, I go back to the inhumaneness of the conditions.
Sure.
Here, that's the piece. But by the same token, it's not supposed to be.
No, of course. But listen, these people committed an act or a series of acts that were wrong, and it was a moment in time and a snapshot for them. And it depends on what you want to do. The prisons are there to act as a deterrent and act as punishment, but also we want fully functioning members of society. And when you look at the reasons why people are very often in prison, and you look at the disproportionate number of black individuals, members of people of color who are in prisons, then you realize that the deck is loaded, and that the underlying issues are socioeconomic rather than the fact that these are bad apples and we just need to punish them and grind them down as hard as we possibly can. And it's clearly not working. And the instances of recidivism are such that the current system is not working. So I think it's admirable that they've managed to band together. I think it's fascinating that they've been able to do this and been so effective in what they've done.
Right. And you mentioned earlier about this whole idea of prison, the rehabilitation power of the prison system, and that piece I'm totally on board with, because there is a power, and you've seen this with some individuals where they've been able to complete college degrees or further their education as a result of their time behind bars. Right. So there is that power as well, and that's meaningful and can be really meaningful and a sacred time for some people.
Sure, absolutely. America, the United States, has the largest prison population in the world, both in terms of absolute numbers and in terms of proportion to the population. It's about 2.2 million individuals are in prison, and that represents 0.91% of the population. That's the highest in the world. So that indicates to me that there is an issue, and it needs to be addressed. And perhaps grassroots, perhaps the way through it, and we've been talking a lot about this in the political process, and people have been talking about what is the underlying causes for this and the disproportionate number of people who are in there for low-hanging fruit, for pretty petty crimes, but are serving serious sentences for possession of drugs, and that disproportionately affects African Americans more than anybody else for a variety of socioeconomic reasons. And we've been talking about how we can actually reverse this and address this. Well, perhaps something like this, grassroots movement, grassroots action movement by the prisoners, by the inmates themselves, could very well be something that actually seeks to bring around meaningful change.
Well, what do you think? Is there value to these grassroots movements? Is there value? What do you think?